In this week's lecture, we'll start discussing our third play of the year, Henry IV, Part 2. And one thing that you'll notice in this play is that, like with Part 1, the emphasis is really on the coming-of-age journey of Prince Henry, or Hal, even though that the plays are titled after his father, the king. In fact, we see King Henry even less in this play, and it's really just following the life of Hal and, to a good extent, the life of Falstaff. We've talked a bit about how Falstaff was a fictional character that Shakespeare invented and inserted into his histories. Well, he turned out to be an extremely popular character. In fact, one of Shakespeare's other plays, The Merry Wives of Windsor, was written at the request of Queen Elizabeth because she wanted to see a play about Falstaff falling in love. So Falstaff was a character that was even popular with the Queen. And that's why you'll notice that in this play, in Part 2, he almost takes center stage. Another thing that you'll notice is that the theme of sickness and old age is really prevalent in this second half of Henry IV. It seems that everyone is sick or suffering from some sort of malady or another, if not physically, then metaphorically. We learn pretty early on, for example, that King Henry has returned from warring in Wales because he was taken with a fit of sickness on the battlefield. And this is actually in line with what we know about the historical Henry IV. He wasn't a very healthy guy. We're not quite sure what was wrong with him, but he apparently developed some sort of painful skin disease later on in his life. Whether it was a form of leprosy or psoriasis or something else, historians are still debating that today, but they'll probably never know for sure, since all we have left of him are bones now, and we can't really do medical tests on him. And we can imagine that Henry might have felt like he was being punished for his sins. Remember that he never got a chance to lead a crusade to the Holy Land to purge Richard's blood from his hands. So now he's been afflicted with physical ailments, as well as continual rebellions throughout England. Another person who's sick, or at least who's pretending to be, is Northumberland. In the last play, you'll remember that he stayed home from the battle at Shrewsbury because he had apparently taken ill. That's all that Hotspur and the others heard from him. In Act 1 of this play, in the very first scene, we see Northumberland receiving word that the battle has been lost and that his son has been killed. And he says that this news has the effect of a healing poison. Basically, it's horrible, but now that he's heard it, he's no longer concerned with being ill. It's an interesting scene because at first, Northumberland gets news that the battle has been won. An ally, Lord Bardolph, not to be confused with Prince Hal's friend, Bardolph, he shows up and tells Northumberland that everything has worked out as well as they could want it to. But then another messenger comes and says that all has in fact been lost. So he's getting conflicting messages, and this ties into the speech of the prologue of the play. Now, not all of Shakespeare's plays have prologues. And a prologue would be a costumed character who walks out onto the stage before the action starts and directly addresses the audience. This particular prologue that we see here, it is thought that the character would come out in a cape painted with hundreds of tongues or sewn with hundreds of tongues. And this is a personification of rumor. And this is what rumor has to say for itself. The prologue begins by saying, "Open your ears, for which of you will stop the vent of hearing when loud rumor speaks? I, from the orient to the drooping west, making the wind my post-horse, still unfold the acts commenced on this ball of earth. Upon my tongue's continual slanders ride, the which in every language I pronounce, stuffing the ears of men with false reports. I speak of peace while covert enmity under the smile of safety wounds the world. And who but rumor, who but only I make fearful musters in prepared defense, whiles the big ear, swollen with some other grief, is thought with child by the stern tyrant war, and no such matter. Rumor is a pipe blown by surmises, jealousies, conjectures, and of so easy and so plain a stop that the blunt monster with uncounted heads, the still discordant wavering multitude, can play upon it. But what need I thus my well-known body to anatomize among my household? Why is rumor here? And then the rumor goes on to give the background to the starting of the first scene. So, in this speech, we can imagine that Shakespeare is taking a jab at the gullibility of the multitudes for believing everything that they hear. And this was in an age before 24-hour news coverage and social media, and false reports could be devastating to war efforts and to other things. Remember that this play, like all of the other ones we're reading, for the most part, was written at a time of political unrest. Queen Elizabeth was old. Nobody knew who was going to make a claim to the throne after she died. And there was the constant threat of Spain to the south and of Ireland to the north. So rumors of war abounded. Many living in Elizabethan England would have had the same experience as Northumberland has at some point in their lives. Completely contradicting reports would come in hot on each other's heels, and nobody would really know what to think for several weeks. But eventually, in the play, Northumberland accepts the grim reality that his side has lost the battle, and that his son, Hotspur, is dead. And he vows to put off his sick clothes, to don armor and wreak havoc. But in scene 3, we'll come back to scene 2 in a minute, we see that even Northumberland's allies don't really believe him anymore. In that scene, we meet the second tier of rebels who have risen up to take the cause of after the defeat of Hotspur, Douglas, and Worcester. There's Lord Bardolph. There's a character named Thomas Mowbray, who is the son of the Mowbray who was exiled by Richard back in Richard II. And then there's also the Archbishop of York. And of these rebels, the Archbishop is the most important because he's thought to speak with the authority of God and with the authority of the church. And so if he steps up and says that the rebels' cause is just and that King Henry needs to be deposed, the commoners are most likely to listen to him. And the Archbishop has a low view of the commoners who he is supposed to be the shepherd of. He echoes rumor's low opinion of the multitudes, and he thinks that they're fickle. They're never happy with the present, and they're always longing for either the past or for the future. He says this of them. He says, "Let us on and publish the occasion of our arms. The Commonwealth is sick of their own choice. Their overgreedy love hath surfeited. An habitation giddy and unsure hath he that buildeth on the vulgar heart. O thou fond many, with what loud applause didst thou beat heaven with blessing, Bolingbroke, before he was what thou wouldst have him be? And being now trimmed in thine own desires, thou, beastly feeder, art so full of him that thou provokest thyself to cast him up. So, thou common dog, didst thou disgorge thy glutton bosom of the royal Richard, and now thou wouldst eat thy dead vomit up, and howl'st to find it. What trust is in these times? They that, when Richard lived, would have him die, are now become enamoured on his grave. Thou that threwest dust upon his goodly head when through proud London he came sighing on, after the admired heels of Bolingbroke, criest now, O earth, yield us that king again, and take thou this. O thoughts of men accursed, past and to come seems best, things present worst." So this is important to note, because we'll see that the commoners, especially in the later plays that we'll cover later on in the year, can make trouble when they want to, and disrupt the schemes and feuds of the great nobles that we're mostly reading about. So these rebels are discussing how to go about defeating Henry, and Lord Bardolph is cautioning them not to make any plans that rely too heavily on Northumberland's men or on Northumberland's promises. He essentially says, look, let's plan for the worst and assume the lowest figure of available men for our own armies, and we'll be better off. And that's not a bad philosophy, really. Meanwhile, back in scene 2, we see Falstaff strutting about London in his newfound dignity with a page, or a serving boy, trailing after him. We can see that he's garnered a bit of a reputation for himself after the Battle of Shrewsbury. Remember, he claimed to be the one to kill Hotspur. But he's still the butt of the jokes. Even his own page is insulting him. And he knows it. He says this to the page at the beginning of the act. Men of all sorts take a pride to gird at me or to joke at me. The brain of this foolish compounded clay, man, is not able to invent anything that tends to laughter more than I invent, or is invented on me. I am not only witty in myself, but the cause that wit is in other men. I do here walk before thee like a sow that hath overwhelmed all her litter but one. If the prince put thee into my service for any other reason than to set me off, why then I have no judgment. So he's saying that he sees himself as a sort of the source and as the progenitor of all wit and comedy. Not only does he know how to make jokes, but he inspires the ability in others to make jokes about him. Maybe somebody who'd never cracked a joke in their life can take a look at Falstaff, and because he's such a ridiculous character, they could find something funny to say about him. But even Falstaff is growing sensible of his own old age and his infirmity. He puts on a good show and still claims to be young, but we learned that he's got a bit of a limp now. Something's wrong with his toe, and he's always out of breath. And he's poor. He's looking to get money out of whoever he can, and he's talking to the page about the various ways that he can do this. And when he meets the Chief Justice in the streets, he even asks him for £1,000. And there's probably not a single person in London who's less likely to give it. The Chief Justice knows all of Falstaff's tricks. He knows all of Hal's, too. We learned that at some point he arrested Hal for striking him on the head, which is a dangerous thing to do. Hal is, after all, the prince and the heir to the throne. So this Chief Justice, even though we're just now meeting him, he is a man who's willing to uphold the law and maintain his own dignity, even at the expense of his personal safety. He kind of reminds me a bit of the Old Testament prophets who would speak out against the wicked kings of Israel and Judah at their own personal risk. So, in any case, he's trying to get a word in with Falstaff about the robbery that happened in the last play at Gad's Hill. And Falstaff is doing everything that he can to avoid the topic. First, he pretends to be deaf. Then he tries to derail the conversation by talking about the king's illness. And then he pretends to be concerned for the Chief Justice's health because he's old. And the Chief Justice, understandably, he's taken aback by all this. He says, "You're calling me old? Have you looked in a mirror lately?" But Falstaff won't confess to his own old age. And he's still playing the old game of claiming that Hal corrupted him, not the other way around. Finally, we learn that Falstaff is supposed to be marching off to meet up with Prince John and with Westmoreland to face off against the rebels in the north. He's not doing that at the moment, however, and the Chief Justice chides him for this as well. And we'll see in the next act that he winds up back at the Boar's Head Tavern in Eastcheap, where he was for the majority of the last play, too. And this is the sort of character that he is. We are probably getting to know all of Falstaff's tricks as well at this point. He vows to change and live a respectable life, but nothing ever really changes. He gets mixed up in an argument with Mistress Quickly shortly after this, and he convinces her to give him the money that the Chief Justice wouldn't. Then he immediately goes to meet up with a prostitute and to drink sack, which is a sort of wine, remember. And we'll see all of this in the readings for next week. We'll also see that Hal himself has had a bit of a relapse. He may have won honor on the battlefield, but in Act 2, he's right back where he was at the beginning of the last play, hanging out at the Boar's Head Tavern and planning to play a prank on Falstaff with Poins. And again, this is why I don't think it was so cut and dry a situation as Hal was pretending it to be. that he was pretending to be some sort of a deviant in order to fool the masses. There's something appealing about the lowlife to him. And that's a trademark of sin, right? There is an appeal to it. Hal wants to have fun, to have no responsibilities, to drink and to party, Hakuna Matata. But he does have a duty to fulfill, to his father and to his country, but also to his own conscience. He knows what he should be doing, and that's why he's been lying to himself for so long about this behavior of his being just an act. There's a lot to cover in next week's lecture, and so that's why I wanted to set the stage for Act 2 a little bit here. And so for next time, read Acts 2 and 3, and we'll take it up from there. Thanks.